The 1974 D United States half dollar, struck at the Denver Mint and carrying the famous D Mint mark, belongs to the long-running Kennedy half-dollar series, a coin born from national grief and transformed into a modern American icon, and the 1974 D issue sits right in the middle of that dramatic era. After the assassination of President John F. Kennedy in November 1963, Congress and the U.S. Mint rushed to honor him with a new circulating coin, and by 1964 the half-dollar was redesigned to feature Kennedy's portrait by Gilroy Roberts on the obverse and Frank Gasparo's presidential seal on the reverse. Even though early half-dollars were made of 90% silver, 1964, and later 40% silver, 1965 to 1970. By 1971 the silver was completely removed, shifting to a copper-nickel clad composition, the same general metal mix used for modern dimes and quarters. Your 1974 D half-dollar is part of the early clad years, a time when the U.S. Mint was pushing hard to meet circulation demands, while Americans were gradually using half-dollars less and less in daily life, which ironically makes these coins feel nostalgic today. The 1974 D has the same standard specifications for the series: 30.6 mm diameter, 11.34 grams weight, and a reeded edge, giving it that classic American coin appearance. This coin carries Kennedy's left-facing profile with the inscriptions "Liberty" above and "I in God We Trust" below, with the date 1974 positioned along the bottom. To the right of the portrait, just above the truncation of Kennedy's neck, sits the small but important D Mint mark, confirming it was struck in Denver. On the reverse is the bold heraldic eagle inspired by the presidential seal, an eagle clutching arrows and an olive branch, surrounded by a ring of stars, and the inscriptions "United States of America" and half-dollar. Historically, the 1974 D issue comes from a period of huge production, as the Mint struck millions of these for circulation, well over 79 million. But despite the large mintage, many saw heavy wear in commerce or were set aside by new collectors, making higher-grade examples more desirable. Numismatically, this year is interesting because of the famous but extremely rare 1974 aluminum cent controversy, which had nothing to do with the half-dollar itself, but still adds flavor to the era. The U.S. Mint was experimenting with alternative metals because of rising production costs, creating a unique atmosphere of change and uncertainty in American coinage. For the 1974 D half-dollar specifically, most pieces are common in circulated condition, but in sharp uncirculated grades, MS 65 and above, they become much scarcer and can attract collector interest, especially if the coin has strong luster and clean surfaces without bag marks. The cultural meaning behind the Kennedy design also keeps the series popular. President Kennedy symbolized youth, hope, and modern American leadership, and his portrait on the half-dollar became one of the most recognized coin designs in the country's history. Even though half-dollars faded from regular use in the 1980s and 1990s, the 1974 D remains a solid, affordable collector coin with historical weight, emotional symbolism, and a glimpse into a changing chapter of American minting. Today, its value usually stays modest in circulated grade, often around face value, but pristine mint-state examples and high-quality collector pieces can carry more worth and always more story. So your 1974 D Kennedy half-dollar isn't just a coin, it's a little metal snapshot of 1970s America, post-silver coinage, post-Kennedy, and full of national memory, sitting right there in your hand like a tiny time capsule from an era of change. Next, top 2. The 1973 D United States half-dollar, struck at the Denver Mint and marked with the small but crucial D Mint mark on the obverse beside Kennedy's neck, belongs to the beloved and historically important Kennedy half-dollar series, a series born directly from national tragedy and forever linked to the legacy of President John F. Kennedy. After Kennedy's assassination on November 22, 1963, the U.S. Mint and Congress fast-tracked the creation of a new coin to honor him, selecting the half-dollar denomination because it was both large enough to hold a strong portrait and popular enough among the public to serve as a meaningful memorial. By early 1964, the coin was released with a 90% silver composition, but due to nationwide hoarding and rising silver costs, the Mint shifted to 40% silver in 1965, and by 1971 the half-dollar transitioned fully to copper-nickel clad, the metal mix your 1973 D uses. This period, early 1970s clad coinage, reflects a major turning point in American numismatic history, where the U.S. Mint adjusted production to modern economics, consumer behavior, and the ongoing disappearance of silver coins from circulation. Your 1973 D-half-dollar sits right in this transitional era. Sturdy, modern, and built for circulation, yet carrying a nostalgic emotional weight because of the Kennedy portrait. The coin's obverse, designed by Gilroy Roberts, shows the iconic left-facing bust of President Kennedy with the bold inscription Liberty arching above, and "I in God we trust" split at the sides of his neck, with the year 1973 placed neatly at the bottom. The Denver Mint mark appears just above the date, confirming its origin. The reverse, designed by Frank Gasparo, carries the powerful and patriotic presidential coat of arms. A heraldic eagle with outstretched wings holding an olive branch in one talon and 13 arrows in the other, surrounded by a ring of 50 stars symbolizing the states, with United States of America above and half-dollar below. This design is rooted in the Great Seal and is meant to project strength, unity, and continuity, something the nation desperately needed at the time of the coin's creation. The specifications remain standard: a diameter of 30.6 millimeters, weight of 11.34 grams, copper-nickel clad composition over a pure copper core, and a sharply reeded edge. What makes the 1973 D unique compared to many other dates in the series is that it was not widely released for circulation. In fact, 1973 half-dollars, both P and D, were primarily minted for mint sets, meaning the general public didn't get them in pocket change the way they did in the 1960s and early 1970s. Because of that, the 1973 D is significantly scarcer in circulation than dates like 1972 or 1974, and most examples found today are relatively high quality because they were stored in government-issued collector sets rather than rattling around in cash drawers and bank bags. Denver struck about 83 million of these coins, but the limited distribution means you don't see them often in everyday coinage. Historically, 1973 was also a tense time for the U.S. Mint because of ongoing metal supply concerns, rising production costs, and the reduced use of half-dollars in daily transactions. Americans were simply not spending them anymore, and banks carried them mostly by request, which makes mid-1970s halves feel especially collector-influenced. In terms of numismatic value, circulated pieces remain mostly worth face value, but uncirculated coins, especially those with strong luster, clean surfaces, and no bag marks, can be worth more to collectors, with premium grades, MS-65 and above, drawing extra interest. Errors for 1973 D-half-dollars are not extremely common, but when they appear, such as off-center strikes, die cracks, clipped planchets, or doubled dies, collectors are very enthusiastic. Beyond money, the Kennedy half-dollar itself carries a strong cultural and symbolic meaning, especially for Americans who lived through the 1960s and 1970s, and owning a 1973 D feels like holding a little archive of history. The post-silver era, the Watergate period, the winding down of the Vietnam War, and the evolution of modern U.S. coinage, all wrapped into one. So your 1973 D half-dollar is more than just a piece of metal. It's a story coin, a time capsule, a link to a nation in transition, and a tribute to a president whose memory shaped an entire. Next, top 3. The 1972 United States half-dollar, Liberty, produced at the Philadelphia Mint with no mint mark, sits at an important moment in the evolution of modern American coinage and carries a mix of historical emotion, technological change, and evolving public habits that shaped how the Kennedy half-dollar was minted and used throughout the 1970s. The series itself was created only 9 years earlier, in 1964, after the shocking assassination of President John F. Kennedy. The nation demanded an immediate tribute, and Congress acted with rare speed, approving a new half-dollar featuring Kennedy's portrait as a circulating memorial that Americans could carry in their pockets. The initial 1964 halves were struck in 90% silver, followed by 40% silver issues from 1965 to 1970, but beginning in 1971, only 1 year before your 1972 coin, all half-dollars transitioned permanently to a copper-nickel clad composition, ending the era of silver circulation coinage forever and setting the stage for a new generation of modern coins. Your 1972 half-dollar represents the second year of this full-clad era. Struck in large quantities as the mint adjusted to the new metal and rising public demand for circulating money during a time when Americans were still somewhat uncertain about the value of non-silver coinage. On the obverse, designed by Gilroy Roberts, the coin features the iconic left-facing bust of President Kennedy, sharp jawline, swept-back hair, and a clean modern profile meant to symbolize youth and progress. The bold inscription Liberty stretches across the top. In God We Trust is split into two parts beneath the portrait, and the year 1972 anchors the design along the lower rim. Because it was made at the Philadelphia Mint, there is no mint mark, and that absence itself becomes part of the story. At the time, Philadelphia regularly omitted mint marks from circulating coins, making the plain 1972 half-dollar the standard issue for most of the country. On the reverse, designed by Frank Gasparro, sits the powerful heraldic eagle adapted from the presidential seal, with a shield across its chest, arrows in one talon and an olive branch in the other, surrounded by a ring of 50 stars that reinforce national unity. The inscriptions United States of America arc above, while half-dollar curves along the bottom. The specifications for your coin follow the new post-silver standard. 30.6 millimeters diameter, 11.34 grams weight, copper-nickel outer layers bonded to a pure copper core, and a reeded edge. Historically, the 1972 issue is notable because it marks the last year in which Kennedy half-dollars were widely used in everyday circulation before half-dollars began to fade from wallets and pockets in the mid-1970s. Banks still ordered them, vending machines still accepted them, and casinos still used large denominations. But the everyday American was slowly losing the habit of spending half-dollars, which makes any 1972 half found in circulation today feel like a little treasure from a world that used money differently. Production at Philadelphia was enormous. Over 150,001,972 halves, part of a push to meet national demand as inflation grew and the U.S. economy shifted away from silver-backed currency traditions. Numismatically, most 1972 halves are common in circulated grade, but uncirculated examples with strong mint luster, clean surfaces, and full strikes are more desirable, especially those graded MS 65 or higher, because clad half-dollars from this period often show weak details or heavy bag marks from rough mint handling. While 1972 doesn't have a famous major error like the 1972 D-No-FG reverse, a Denver variety missing designer Frank Gasparro's initials, the Philadelphia Mint still produced occasional die cracks, off-center strikes, and clipped planchets that collectors enjoy hunting. Culturally, this coin remains an everyday memorial to a president whose image still evokes hope, modernity, and a sense of American idealism. And because the 1972 half-dollar belongs to the early post-silver era, it captures a turning point in the nation's relationship with its currency, a blend of nostalgia, economic necessity, and shifting public habits. So your 1972 Kennedy half-dollar isn't just a piece of pocket change. It's a miniature slice of 1970s America, a memorial to a fallen leader, a symbol of changing mint technology, and a lasting reminder of a time when Americans still carried big, bold coins that told the story of their country right in their hands. Next top 4. The 1971 United States half-dollar, Liberty, struck at the Philadelphia Mint with no mint mark, sits at a historic crossroads in American coinage, representing the exact moment when the United States officially ended all silver content in circulating half-dollars and moved fully into the modern copper-nickel era, making the 1971 issue a monumental shift in the long life of U.S. money. This coin is the first true clad Kennedy half-dollar and stands as a symbol of changing economic pressures, evolving public habits, and a country adapting to new realities after the tumultuous 1960s. The Kennedy half-dollar series itself began in 1964, rushed into production after President John F. Kennedy's assassination, with Americans embracing the coin as both a memorial and a keepsake, leading to widespread hoarding of early issues. First the 90% silver 1964 coins, then the 40% silver pieces minted from 1965 through 1970. And by 1971, the rising cost of silver forced the Treasury to remove precious metal entirely, redesigning the coin with a copper core and copper-nickel outer layers, the same durable composition used today. Your 1971 half-dollar reflects this transition perfectly. The first year struck in massive numbers to circulate widely without the fear of being hoarded for metal value, though ironically, Americans were already beginning to use half-dollars less and less in everyday life. The obverse, created by Gilroy Roberts, features the iconic left-facing profile of Kennedy. Strong jawline, youthful hair, and clean lines that capture the hopeful, modern vision the nation once associated with him. Framed by the word liberty around the top rim, while "I in God We Trust" sits beneath the portrait, split by Kennedy's neck, and the date 1971 rests at the bottom. Because this is the Philadelphia issue, it has no mint mark, which at that time was standard for Philadelphia-struck coins. On the reverse, designed by Frank Gasparo, the powerful, detailed heraldic eagle spreads its wings proudly, clutching 13 arrows and an olive branch, with a shield on its chest and a halo of stars circling above. A direct adaptation of the presidential seal meant to echo dignity, authority, and continuity of the American government after the trauma of the early 1960s. The inscriptions "United States of America" and $half complete the design, bold and clear, giving the coin a timelessly patriotic look. Technically, your coin uses the new post-silver clad specifications. 30.6 mm diameter, 11.34 grams weight, reading on the edge, and the distinctive sandwich coloration of copper visible between the outer layers of nickel. Historically, the 1971 $half signals the beginning of a new monetary era. Collectors, banks, and the public were adjusting to the fact that silver coins were no longer coming out of circulation, and many people still saved 1971 halves just out of habit, thinking they might someday be valuable, which ironically kept them from circulating freely even when the metal was no longer precious. Philadelphia struck over 150 million of these coins, flooding the U.S. economy with the new clad $half. Yet despite such enormous production, relatively few circulated heavily. By the mid-1970s, the $half was fading from daily use, replaced by smaller coins, vending machine preferences, and changing consumer habits. Numismatically, the 1971 issue is common in circulated grades, but significantly tougher in high mint state condition, because early clad coins often suffered from weak strikes, muted luster, and heavy contact marks in mint bags. True gem examples, MS 65 and above, are desirable and noticeably scarcer. Error collectors also find 1971 fascinating because the early clad years produced unusual mistakes. Double strikes, die cracks, off-center errors, clipped planchets, and especially missing FG reverses, where designer Frank Gasparo's initials vanish due to overpolished dies, though the no FG variety is more famous in the 1972 D issue. In a cultural sense, the 1971 $half still carries the emotional weight of Kennedy's legacy, reminding Americans of hope, loss, and the national identity of the 1960s, while also representing the country's shift into a modern monetary system. So your 1971 United States $half is more than just a coin. It's the exact hinge point between the Silver Age and the modern age of U.S. currency, a memorial to a president whose memory still shapes American symbolism, and a relic from a period when the very metal in America's pockets was changing, a solid, historical, everyday treasure from the dawn of the clad era. Next top 5. The 1977 D United States $half. Liberty, struck at the Denver Mint and carrying the D Mint mark, is part of the long-running and culturally powerful Kennedy $half series, and it represents a moment when $half were still produced in huge numbers, even though everyday Americans were slowly stopping their use, giving the 1977 D a kind of bittersweet historical charm as one of the last widely distributed working $half of the late 20th century. Born from the national trauma of President John F. Kennedy's assassination in 1963, the Kennedy $half series had been embraced early on as a circulating memorial, and Americans hoarded the early silver issues. First the 1964 90% silver coins, then the 40% silver coins of 1965 to 1970. So by the time we reached 1977, the series had already settled into its long-term clad composition, which began in 1971, a pure copper core bonded between layers of copper-nickel, sturdy, modern, and no longer affected by rising silver prices. Your 1977 D $half keeps these modern specs. 11.34 grams in weight, 30.6 millimeters diameter, reeded edge, and the classic copper stripe visible on the edge, giving it that familiar clad sandwich look. On the obverse, designed by Gilroy Roberts, you see the instantly recognizable left-facing portrait of President Kennedy. Youthful features, swept-back hair, confident jawline, capturing the sense of energy and idealism that defined the early 1960s and kept Kennedy's symbolic presence alive on American currency long after his passing. The word liberty curves boldly across the top rim. "In God We Trust" appears below Kennedy's neck in its traditional split format, and the date 1977 sits at the bottom, while to the right of the portrait, tucked just above the date, is the small but important D mint mark, confirming Denver as its birthplace. On the reverse, Frank Gasparo's adaptation of the presidential seal continues the powerful patriotic theme. An eagle with outstretched wings clutching 13 arrows in its left talon and an olive branch in its right, a shield over its chest, and a ring of 50 stars surrounding the eagle in a halo of national symbolism. The inscriptions "United States of America" above and $50 below create the final flourish of official dignity. Historically, 1977 was a year when the U.S. Mint was still producing $50 for circulation, but demand was shrinking quickly. Vending machines almost never used them, banks stocked them only on request, and most Americans preferred smaller denominations or paper money, which means that even though Denver struck tens of millions of 1977 D $50, surprisingly few saw heavy everyday wear. This is why many 1977 D halves exist today in relatively decent condition, but truly gem-quality uncirculated examples. Sharply struck, bright luster, minimal marks, still stand out and attract collector interest. Denver's production for this year topped 31 million coins, far lower than earlier years like 1972 or 1974, showing the mint adjusting to declining demand. Numismatically, the 1977 D does not have any legendary major errors like the 1974 aluminum cent or the 1964 SMS mysteries, but it does have collectible varieties such as die cracks, struck through errors, off-center strikes, and occasional weak reverse strikes that are fun for error hunters. The year itself sits in an interesting slice of American history. Post-Vietnam, post-Watergate, early Carter era, rising inflation, and a society shifting rapidly into a new economic and technological age. All while the U.S. Mint continued pumping out $50 that most people no longer used, making the Kennedy $50 feel like a symbolic artifact more than a day-to-day tool of commerce. Yet the emotional connection to Kennedy, a president forever linked to themes of hope, youth, and national possibility, kept the coin popular with collectors, grandparents, gift givers, and even casinos, where $50 had a brief second life. So your 1977 D Kennedy $50 is more than a piece of clad metal. It's a small time capsule of 1970s America, a continuation of a national memorial, a product of a mint adjusting to changing habits, and a relic from the final chapter of $50 as real everyday money, holding both historical weight and nostalgic charm in a way few other modern coins can next top 5. The 1978 United States $50, Liberty, struck at the Philadelphia Mint and carrying no mint mark, sits in a fascinating period of American coinage where the Kennedy $50 series continued to be minted in large numbers, even as public use of the denomination faded dramatically, giving coins like the 1978 half a strange, almost nostalgic identity as one of the final, everyday mintages, before $50 nearly disappeared from American pockets. Ever since the series began in 1964 as a response to the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, the coin has held powerful sentimental value, with Americans eagerly keeping the early silver issues, the 90% silver 1964 and the 40% silver 1965 to 1970, as keepsakes, meaning that by the time we reach 1978, the Kennedy $50 had fully transitioned into its modern copper-nickel-clad composition, established in 1971, with a pure copper core bonded between layers of copper-nickel, a cost. Efficient, durable metal mix designed to survive daily use without relying on precious metal. On the obverse, sculpted by Gilroy Roberts, the bold left-facing profile of John F. Kennedy still captures the energy, optimism, and tragic legacy of the early 1960s, framed by the tall letters of liberty spaced across the top of the coin. The national motto "In God We Trust" appears beneath Kennedy's chin in the classic split arrangement, and the date 1978 sits proudly along the lower rim. With Philadelphia striking this piece, no mint mark appears anywhere on the obverse, a clean, blank space that was normal for Philadelphia coinage at the time. Turning to the reverse, designed by Frank Gasparo, the coin carries the majestic heraldic eagle adapted from the presidential seal. Wings outstretched, arrows in one talon, olive branch in the other, a shield across its chest, and a ring of 50 stars surrounding it in a radiating circle that symbolizes unity and federal authority. The inscriptions United States of America and half-dollar wrap around the eagle, giving the design a strong, patriotic presence. The specifications remain standard for the modern half-dollar. 30.6 millimeters diameter, 11.34 grams weight, reeded edge, copper core visible at the edge, and a silver-gray surface from the nickel alloy. Historically, 1978 reflects the late decline of half-dollar circulation. Banks kept ordering them, the U.S. Mint kept striking them, and casinos still used them in quantity, but in everyday life, most Americans simply didn't spend 50-cent pieces anymore, preferring quarters, dollar bills, and eventually electronic transactions. Still, Philadelphia produced more than 13 million 1978 half-dollars, a relatively low number compared to earlier years, but still enough to satisfy the shrinking demand. Because of the denomination's falling popularity, many 1978 half-dollars avoided heavy circulation and survive today in remarkably clean condition, though truly high-grade examples, MS-65 and above, remain desirable because early clad coins often show weak strikes, bag marks, or dull luster from the minting process. From a collector's perspective, the 1978 issue is common but meaningful. It represents the final stretch of the Kennedy series before its production numbers plummeted in the 1980s, making it one of the last regular years when most half-dollars entered general circulation instead of being made mostly for collectors. Error collectors also appreciate this year. Varieties such as off-center strikes, die cracks, clipped planchets, and struck-through errors exist and add excitement for those seeking standout examples. In terms of its cultural footprint, the 1978 Kennedy half-dollar still carries the emotional weight of the Kennedy legacy, echoing the nation's collective memory of the 1960s while also marking a transitional era. America was entering a new economic period. Inflation was changing spending habits, and vending machines, often the biggest influencers of coin popularity, favored smaller denominations, pushing the half-dollar further into semi-retirement. So your 1978 Philadelphia Kennedy half-dollar isn't just a coin. It's a miniature window into the late 1970s, a piece of American history minted during economic shifts and changing public habits, a reminder of Kennedy's enduring legacy, and one of the last widely circulated half-dollars before the denomination became something people saw more in collections than in cash drawers. It's a sturdy, symbolic, historically rich little time capsule.